few days ago, Johns Hopkins professor Elliot Cohen wrote a really helpful article about wrapping our heads around this current conflict in the Middle East. And in the total absence of any coherent and compelling casus belli coming from the White House, pundits and citizens alike have been scrambling for relevant analogs and precedents to contextualize what the fuck is going on, for how long, and why. So Cohen suggests we should embrace a certain epistemic humility. And rather than any confident rush to premature judgment, we should actually think about what models apply. Is this, for example, another Afghanistan, suckered in for decades against a hardened enemy who can survive in caves deeper than our bunker-busting bombs can reach, only to give up exhausted and cede all that hard-fought ground to our enemies as we, retreating disgrace? Or perhaps it's something from the other border, another Iraq, blundering into war with a flimsy pretext like yellow cake uranium that will only radicalize the population further, like ISIS, and leave us struggling to install a friendly, compliant insider to run things. Remember Ahmad Shirabi? Or maybe it's the deep cut of all cuts. It's another Vietnam, tilting its shadows, convinced of theoretical commie dominoes toppling around the world if we don't win in the jungles of Southeast Asia. Just swap the Red Scare for Islamic jihadis and we're halfway there. And we've even got the tragic echo of My Lai, where 350 Vietnamese villagers were massacred by U.S. troops, with the 180 Iranian schoolgirls and teachers that we bombed last week. Or, fingers crossed, as POTUS is clearly hoping, it's just another Venezuela. Borrow the valor and competence of U.S. Special Forces to execute, cut the head off the snake, install a compliant second-in-command, secure the VIG for the dawn, and let the people flounder under the new/old regime. Note to self, if you were trying to do that, you probably wouldn't want to kill the fucking new guy's father, mother, wife, and son before inviting him to the negotiating table as the Israelis did last week. But really, if we want to search for relevant analogs for our current moment, we might want to go back even further, like 2,500 years ago, to a little spot across the Mediterranean called Marathon. And this isn't even a flight of history nerd fancy. Just a few months ago, Netanyahu made the connection explicit when he likened modern Israel to the Spartans, suggesting they needed to behave as a warrior state amongst their ancient enemies. So, to recap the old story of the Battle of Marathon. In 490 BCE, a ragtag bunch of newly democratized Athenians defeated the massive Persian invasion of Darius. 6,400 dead Persians, only 192 slain Athenians. It was an upset to end all upsets. And after all, Athens had only been a democratic state for 18 years. They were the runty kid brother to the ballers of Sparta, and I suspect Pete Hegseth has a good wink to that movie 300 and an oiled-up Leonidas, at least on the monthly. But that noble battle of Thermopylae doesn't happen until a decade after Marathon. So, in their direst hour of need, the Athenians sent an urgent plea for help to their Spartan allies. But the Spartans were kind of cynical, claimed they were in the middle of a religious ceremony, and slow-rolled their reply. And so the brave Athenians, they had to fight on, unaided, until one young and plucky fella named Phidippides laced up his hoka sandals and ran the 26.2 miles to their neighbors, breathlessly shouting, "We've won," only to die of a heart attack on the spot. So this was so heroic, apparently, that it's become the inspiration for fun runs the world over. Hashtag just do it. The Athenians' underdog victory against this massive Persian empire inspired the rise of democracy all across the other Greek city-states. One by one, they threw off the yoke of their Persian masters and chose independence. So a ragtag bunch of citizens, not mercenaries, with their backs up against the wall, rallied to defend their own freedom. Freed men fought more bravely than hired guns or forced slaves. John Stuart Mill famously said that the Battle of Marathon, even as an event in British history, is more important than the Battle of Hastings, which was the Norman invasion. Isaac Asimov, the physicist, wondered if the Athenians had lost at Marathon, Greece might have never gone on to develop the peak of its civilization. And that's a peak whose fruits we moderns have inherited. Good old reggae star Jimmy Cliff once sang, "I'd rather be a free man in my grave than living as a puppet or a slave." So in short, Marathon has been a really big deal and huge inspo for the world we inherited for all sorts of noble and democratic reasons. So that's the gloss. let's connect the dots to today. So Persia equals Iran. Easy peasy. And while the Islamic Republic of Iran has nowhere near the reach of the ancient Persian Empire, it still occupies a pretty large spot on the map, and you can extend its influence to shipping lanes like the Straits of Hormuz and the Suez Canal, which are both in reach of its missiles. Extend its reach even further, the 3H proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, and pending access to nuclear weapons, and you can make a credible case that they're a solid stand-in for the Persian baddies of yore. So next, Sparta equals Israel. Didn't say it, Netanyahu did. It's a hyper-militant state who, in the crux, hid behind piety. Sorry, can't come to your aid, we're in the middle of a religious festival, and opted instead for a pretty calculated realpolitik. Let's let our rivals wear down our enemies, and we can come in and mop up afterward. Today, Israel isn't operating in conjunction with U.S. interests. They're very much running their own playbook. And fueled by a far-right, ultra-Zionist coalition, which itself is a questionable religious justification, not unlike their Spartan antecedents, they're whacking every possible replacement to the recently whacked Ali Khamenei, to the point where DJT even quipped, all of our replacements are getting killed, so soon we won't even know anybody in Iran. And the Israelis have taken this moment of chaos to go hard again against Beirut and the remnants of Hezbollah, while creating nearly 1 million fresh refugees in Lebanon. In short, they're gunning for the total destabilization of Iran, and they're just as happy to have it be a crippled, failed state rather than supporting any humanitarian or democratic transition for its people. And this is not what anyone in NATO, the G7, Iranian dissidents, or the Gulf states want. This is what the Zionists and Israel want. So like the Spartans, some pretty bare-knuckled realpolitik. Lastly, Athenians equal America, democracy for the win, right? Only we're not 18 years into the experiment of self-governance, we're 250 years in. We're no longer fresh-faced farmers and the artisans of Greece or even the plucky Minutemen of Boston. Now we're looking a little bit bloated and long in the tooth ourselves. So here's the lessons for all of us to consider and why the Battle of Marathon might be one of our most helpful analogs for our current situation. So Persia. Marathon was the beginning of the end for this empire, and proof that what once seemed invulnerable bleeds too. Totalitarians and tyranny can't defeat free men and women indefinitely. So the Islamic Republic's days may in fact be numbered. Sparta. They lived by the sword, and they died by the sword. Kicked ass for a while, but ultimately left no contributions in art, philosophy, governance for their legacy. And by prioritizing their own militaristic agenda and cynically using religiosity to justify their actions, they ended up isolated and ultimately defeated. The last 3 years of Netanyahu's government has effectively erased the never-again sympathies of the Holocaust and has instead provoked a rising tide of anti-Semitism around the world. And this recent belligerence on Israel's part likely makes Jews lack faith, not more, in the long run. Lastly, Athens. Fighting for freedom is a potent superpower. And the only question for America today is, are we still upholding that legacy? Do our soldiers, do our generals, do our citizens even know what we're fighting and dying for? Are we upholding ideals that inspire, or simply maintaining power and profit we prefer? Have we become more like Sparta, bristling with spears and mercenaries, but doomed to decay? Or have the roles reversed entirely? Are we now a stand-in for the Persian Empire, bloated, arrogant, and destined for a fall? So the only good news in this otherwise tragic and messy situation lies in the Athenians themselves and their lessons for us. If we defer to religious justification, cynical politics, or the simple power of empire, we are likely to end up in the dustbin of history alongside Sparta and Persia. But if we rise up and fight for freedom, for democracy, and for human values that are timeless, well, we have a chance to secure our legacy and to shape the future, to decide the outcome for ourselves, to reaffirm that original inspiration of Marathon. To make America great again, we might need to make America Greek again. Because as everyone knows, securing justice for all was never going to be a sprint.